Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It is Father Craig Friday, and we are here for Father Craig Friday.
I am here, and I feel very welcome. Thanks for having me on the show, Brienne.
It's always good. It's always good to have you on the show. You're like...
I feel like I'm supposed to say that, something like that, because that's what people always say on shows. Thanks for having me on the show.
They do say that.
But I just realized it's named Father Craig Friday, so you're welcome for being on my show.
Thank you for having me on your show, Father
Thank you.
Craig.
You're very welcome.
Wow.
So good. Thank you for running my show for me.
Yeah, you're the star. I'm just the little, I'm like the little... Joe Rogan has his podcast. He has Jamie, and Jamie's just the guy who does all the technical stuff. You don't even see what he looks like. That's me. You're the face of this.
No, I think you're much more enjoyable to listen to than me. I've tried to do things on my own, like my YouTube stuff, and it's not nearly as enjoyable.
They've been going very well.
It's not nearly as enjoyable.
Okay, well, maybe. We'll see. All right, so our very first question here, because that's what we do here, we ask questions. But the first one is, would you rather catch a sunrise or a sunset?
I'm presuming you mean watch it.
Yeah.
I don't know
when
how
you
to catch
catch
one.
it, you
it's like catching
you
the
know
leprechaun,
what I mean.
or like
would you rather
finding
watch
the gold at the end of the rainbow? Like
sunrise or sunset? Which is better? Why? One has to be better than the other.
No, it doesn't. How do you compare a sunrise and a sunset?
Well, I think about like the mental state. There's something about watching the sun, like when the whole world's asleep, like it's still dark, it's quiet, nobody's moving yet, and you catch that first bit of light that comes over, the horizon, and it's just like, a new day.
I think I'm going with sunset.
You're going with sunset?
I'm going with sunset.
Okay, so why?
I don't know, other than, so my dad, when I was a little kid, would always point, and it's usually a sunset, and he'd point at it and say, look, God got out his paintbrush tonight, and he'd point at it, and I'd go, oh, that's beautiful.
That's a really sweet statement.
I know, and it was beautiful, and I liked that when my dad would tell me things like that, and I don't know where he stole it from, because I'm sure he stole it, but it was good, and I don't know, I like sunsets. I think sunsets are better.
Okay, I'm going with sunrise.
Plus, it's getting closer to bedtime, and I like sleeping.
Do you get excited for sleep? Or you're like, ooh, I get to sleep?
Actually, no, I'm not very good at that anymore.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I like the sunrise just because, like the world is still asleep and you're there to witness the first light. And so you're awake before other people are. And it feels like your own private sunrise.
I'm not typically awake before other people are, if I can avoid it.
Okay. All right. Well, for those tuning in for the first time, Father Craig Friday is our podcast where we ask a Catholic priest anything. And one of our listeners wants to know, why do priests wear black?
Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash. Y'all, there's a whole song about why he wears black.
Yeah.
Yeah. An entire song.
Ask me why I always dress in black. Why I don't have bright colors on my back.
See? You know the song.
I love the song. I like this song.
Song.
It's a great song. Okay. So really, I think there's a whole history of clerical dress and how it develops. But my thinking is, I think it was just that the black dyes were cheaper. And that's probably why the cassocks were black. But there wasn't any real regulation of that until later in the church history. On what colors and where. But there are other colors that priests wear. So,
that's true.
For example, religious orders might have their own colors. Benedictine would have like the white with the black scapular on it. The Franciscans wear brown. But also in different parts of the world, the clerical dress looks different too. For example, in India, white is a much more common color. And they would wear the white because it doesn't reflect. It's cooler. It's a cooler color to wear in hot temperatures.
Black just absorbs the sun.
Yes.
And just soaks it.
And so I know, and I think you're even allowed here, so long as it's a clerical dress. I don't know, maybe the Latin rite is required to be black in certain places, but I see priests who have like blue or even purple and things like that. I don't wear that well, but my African priest brothers wear it very well.
Yeah, they look so good in some of those colors. Yeah, I
shout out to Father Uche Chukwu Sochukwu Ande.
Father Uche, we love you and your beautiful blue priest vestments, like a light, soft baby blue. Oh, this looks so good. Or he goes a full blown, like he's either in the nice blue shirt, or he does like full blown cassock with like the little.
Yeah, he can do the cassock well. I just look like a fat guy in a dress. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said it, not me. I'm agreeing with. I don't know.
Did you just agree? Oh, you're supposed to argue with me.
No, Father Craig, you don't look like that at all.
Does this cassock make me look fat?
Well, it's black, and black's a slimming color.
That's right. So
maybe they'll cancel each other out
possibly.
a little bit.
Yes, maybe stripes?
Yeah. Just picturing a zebra Father Craig, like in stripes.
That's the collar. That's the stripe. I
Oh,
just
that's
have this
the
one
stripe.
weird stripe.
The one stripe.
One weird stripe.
Yeah. So that's why priests wear black. I'd heard the same thing. It's just that, the dyes were cheaper. And so that it was kind of a financial thing. But then also, if you're having to wear it every day, like white, okay, when I was in the convent, I mean, those sisters have to like bleach their things like crazy because white, just like, let's say you're writing, it just the desk, like their sleeves start to turn a color. And so white is very difficult to keep up with.
It really is.
Yeah. Black, it's kind of like, you can get away
I know.
with
I actually do get away. You got me tacos earlier. I spilled tacos on myself.
Tacos dripped all over Father Greg.
Yeah, you can see it right there a little bit. Not so bad.
All right, so here's our next question coming from a listener. They just said, I love the way that they phrase this. They just said, what's the deal with indulgences?
What is the deal with indulgences?
I don't know. What's the deal with indulgences?
What's the deal with indulgences? Well, is this a reference to when some people in the church were selling them, making a deal with indulgences?
My guess is they probably read something like that, and so they're like, hold up, what's the deal with indulgences? Like they were just kind of like scandalized or upset, and so now they're...
What's the deal with indulgences? I think people are just confused on what they are, honestly.
It can be a little bit confusing.
Right. So the general idea is this, and I think I'm going to butcher this history and give a paraphrase of it, but I think the idea was that we recognize that some people in history were very, very holy. And so it goes back actually to, there was an order of penitence for those who had sinned grievously in the early church. And if you committed one of the big three, adultery, murder, or apostasy, abandoning the faith, then you would and wanted to reconcile with the church. The confession process was much more extensive, and you would do penance that would span sometimes years, actually often years, and it'd be pretty extraordinary. You'd be in an order of people who were doing penance, and been preparing to come back into a union with the church, and you would have, I guess, certain things that you would have to do in order to sort of complete that, I guess. And at some point, there was this recognition that, hey, this guy over here is like super holy and died like a martyr's death, and like they have an abundance of grace. Can we take some of the things that they merited and sort of apply that to this person over here? And there was sort of this recognition that, yeah, you could do that. And so there's like an idea of the storehouse of grace in the life of the church and the merits of their people. Of course, the true merit comes from Christ, but it's a participation in the life of Christ that someone lives of their free will. They'd be able to merit in that case. And apply that to another person, and especially in like this order of penitence to like sort of advance that more quickly, so to speak, and they could take that and apply it to this other place and help this person sort of come back into that full communion. I think that's really the origin of indulgences, and eventually what happened is that got brought into, I guess, a way of applying those graces of others to individual persons from that storehouse of grace by the completing of a particular act or action. And so a plenary indulgence would be like the full pardon of any temporal punishment. So there's the supernatural effect of sin, which is that separation from God, that mortal sin, the death of the soul, essentially. But when you're forgiven by God, that's repaired. But the temporal effects of that sin remain in a person, and so we have to do sort of penance in this life to make up those I guess, natural effects of sin in our life, so to speak. And so that might happen through growing in prayer and holiness, of doing prayer, fasting, or a particular sort of penance, a way of praying. But with a plenary indulgence, this is from the storehouse of grace. If a particular person were to do this action, usually it's a prayer for the intentions of the Holy Father. There would be an Our Father, perhaps a creedal recitation, some Hail Marys of some kind, with a detachment from any mortal sin in their lives, complete detachment from sin, with intention of going and receiving Holy Communion as soon as possible, or confession as soon as possible. Then there'd be remission for the temporal punishment for your sins in the life to come, purgatory. Yeah, and this is what an indulgence is, essentially. And an indulgence is a taking of that from that storehouse of grace, applying it to a particular person who may lack a certain merit in their lives, with those conditions attached to it. And it is necessary for a person to have a detachment from sin in order to really receive the fullness of the effect of that indulgence. So, I mean, that's kind of a recap, and I probably missed some important parts, but that's generally what an indulgence is. It's the idea that we can take from the riches and the treasures of the church and the life of the saints and Christ's passion and death, and apply that to particular persons through the mediation of the church in a particular set of circumstances which the church has dictated.
Yeah. And they are particular. Like when you look up different types of indulgences, like they're specific. So it's like,
yeah, there's tons of them.
You do this thing, or you pray at this place and you do these prayers. And so it's kind of,
yeah, we just recently during the COVID quarantine, were given some specific plenary indulgences. There was one for the U.S. too, from the president of the USCCB has obtained those for particular circumstances. And I can't recall them off the top of my head, but I think with the COVID stuff from the Holy Father, it was during Lent praying the Stations of the Cross, the Rosary, with the intention of when you're possible to go again to confession and receive the Eucharist, which we weren't able to do that during that piece of that time. But
Yeah. So cool. That's what the deal is with indulgences.
Yeah, you can Google the heck out of it and find a bunch of stuff out there.
Yeah. Okay, so here's our final question here. This person said, Catholics say that the Pope is infallible. If only Jesus was perfect, how can another man be considered infallible?
What do you think infallible means?
Without error?
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. But when is the Pope infallible?
Only very specific situations. Like, it's not like he's always infallible.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the idea of infallibility is that, let's say you were taking a test and there's 100 questions on the test. Let's say that you answered 100 questions. If you were infallible, you would be guaranteed of having 100% of those questions correct. But if you only answered 3 of them, the other 97% of them unanswered, right? Obviously, there's not the answer, but the 3 that you answered would be correct. We often think that infallibility means that, how do I put this, that you can't be wrong. It just means that in this very specific set of circumstances, so in this case, sort of like a test would be a very specific set of circumstances, the person who is infallible would maybe be infallible in taking that test, and only the questions that they answer would be guaranteed to be right, but not all. They may not answer all the questions. Right. But in the rest of their life, they'd be sort of free to make mistakes. Yeah. But on the test, right, the infallibility is for that particular set of circumstances for taking that test. And so in this case, what that means is that the Holy Father, in faith and morals, that would be sort of the test. And whatever questions he answers in a very specific set of circumstances, saying, I, as the successor of the chair of St. Peter, answer this question, and this is infallible, then it would be considered without error. There'd be no mistake on that. But in the rest of sort of the things, right, they wouldn't be infallible. They'd be able to make mistakes. They'd be able to be in error outside of those specific circumstances, answering a question about faith and morals. And that's only happened, I think, 2 or 3 times in the entire history of the church. Because the ordinary way the church teaches is not by papal infallibility, but rather by the College of Bishops speaking together on a certain way of certain matters, usually in ecumenical councils. And so infallibility doesn't mean the Pope never makes mistakes. It means in this very specific set of circumstances, when they're answering questions, certain matters of faith and morals, they are free from error. It also doesn't mean that they answer the question in its entirety and say everything that there is to be said about it.
Right.
Or why that's the case. Yeah. So an example of this would be the Immaculate Conception, that Mary was conceived without sin. This is one of the statements that the Pope has made that is an infallible statement. So if he says that in this specific matter that this is, essentially this is an infallible statement, it's without error, but it doesn't explain to us why this is the case or what the theological meaning of it is. That's left to us to explore and to unpack. But we can know without error that Mary was conceived immaculately, without free from original sin. And then we have a bunch of theology to sort of understand what that means and why, and to unpack that mystery. But we know it to be true. We know it to be of God and of revelation. And so papal infallibility doesn't mean the Pope doesn't make mistakes, doesn't do things wrong in other areas. It doesn't mean that they're Jesus. But it means that with this authority entrusted to them by God in this particular circumstance, we can be assured that what they have said is free from error.
Yeah. And I mean, basically, in the way that they even worded the question, you can see that because they said if only Jesus was perfect. So I think people oftentimes think that infallible is synonymous with perfect. Like
Right.
that when we say the Pope is infallible, that he's perfect. And it's like, no, because that's not.
It's the thought that you take the test, you get a 100.
Yeah.
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 In this case, you might take the test and only be, answer 3 questions and you get, 3.
Yeah. A very low grade, right? But that those 3 questions are
That's
correct.
not the best analogy. I'm going to walk that one back. I think probably we should let go of the test analogy. But
no test taking.
Yeah, I think this is the idea. That doesn't mean the Pope is perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Infallibility is something different than perfection. And I think that throws people off when they hear that. They're like, wait, only Jesus was perfect. What do you mean? It's like, well, we didn't say the Pope was perfect. We said he was infallible.
In fact, there's been some popes in history who are pretty despicable.
Yeah.
But they never answered any. Well, I'm going to need to get rid of my test analogy still. So
okay.
It means that they did not speak infallibly on faith and morals.
Correct.
But if they had, God would have preserved them from error in that act. But they never did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very, very rare occurrence, as Father Craig said. So it's, again, rarely done, but can be done.
That's right.
So, okay. All right, everyone. That was this episode. So if you have a question that you would like to have answered by a Catholic priest, you can submit your question to our email, which is podcast@txstatecatholic.org. You send us your question. We'll get to it on the next show. And now we're signing off now.
Our Lady of Wisdom.
Pray for us.